folks, of course, the Supreme Court has ruled on the issue of civil asset forfeiture, of course. This is a show that we've been covering quite some time, where law enforcement has been able to seize the assets of individuals who not only are convicted, but folks who also simply been arrested, and they've kept those assets even when the charges have been dropped. In a particular case, the Supreme Court ruled in one case where a gentleman forfeited $200,000 of illegal profits after pleading guilty, but federal prosecutors wanted him to pay back the remaining $70,000. He argued he never received any money in the deal. Writing the opinion on behalf of the court, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said forfeiture laws are limited to property the defendant himself actually acquired as a result of the crime. Further adding, Congress did not authorize the government to confiscate substitute property from other defendants or co-conspirators. It authorized the government to confiscate assets only from the defendant who acquired the property and who bears responsibility for its dissipation. And the ruling contradicts the actions taken by Trump Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who has been rolling back reform efforts put in place under President Barack Obama, including calling for federal prosecutors to impose harsher sentences for drug crimes. Joining us from D.C. to discuss this is A. Scott Bolden, of course, attorney at law as well. There, a former head of the D.C. Democratic Party, and so glad to have Scott. And so, Scott, I want to start actually with you on this issue before I bring in our other panelists. I mean, this is a huge, huge issue when you talk about these federal prosecutors pretty much being able to do whatever they wanted. And also, it puts on notice these law enforcement officials who also have been seizing assets.
Yeah, not only seizing assets, which are the fruits of some criminal enterprise, but also if you look at the structuring laws, they've been seizing those assets and sitting on them too from people who haven't committed any crime. In this particular case, I think the Supreme Court was right and the justice was right. You can be co-defendants in a drug deal or a drug case, but you've got to tie the profits of those drug deals to the individual. So the brother in the Tennessee case, they could tie that $200,000 to him. The other brother, which was the $70,000, they couldn't tie that to him per se. They just knew that it was the fruits of the criminal enterprise between the brothers. It's a fair decision.
And again, I know some folks might be watching and they're saying, guys, come on, you're talking about drug dealers, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that what we've seen across this country, we've seen law enforcement agencies literally seizing the assets of people who were simply arrested and then telling them you have to prove that you bought these items through legal means and not ill-gotten gains.
Exactly.
And literally, and you have had in some cases, Scott, where individuals, in terms of these law enforcement agencies, look, they've actually had wish lists they've been making out in terms of, well, we want this, and so some folks have been saying, look, this is just flat out wrong.
Well, some of the smaller police departments around the country have literally funded their budgets with these funds that have been, whether they legally seized but illegally held, if you will. You remember on the DOJ under Eric Holder, they put limitations after these stories came out and they did their own investigation. They put limitations on how long you could hold these funds and how you could use them, as well as whether you could even go after these funds from an internal DOJ memo. And so it seems now with the new leadership at DOJ, one, that's changing, but two, this Supreme Court decision that says it's one thing to be a co-defendant in a criminal case, it's another thing to tie assets to each individual. Because you tie them to one doesn't mean you tie them to the co-defendants. Each one has to be tied, the monies have to be tied to the individual. They couldn't do it in this Tennessee case, and the Supreme Court Justice said so in her lead opinion.
I want to bring in Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, leadership strategist and author of How Exceptional Black Women Lead, and also Brandon Cooper, chairman of the Prince George's County Republican Party. One of the things that you've had here, Avis and Brandon, is that you've had folks like the Koch brothers who've been very much against civil asset forfeiture. So you've had libertarians standing alongside progressives or liberals in combating conservatives over this whole issue of civil asset forfeiture.
And to that point, I actually work for the Institute for Justice, which is a libertarian law firm that's leading the effort to curtail civil asset forfeiture. So it's definitely an issue. A lot of Republicans are against it. And to your point, you said earlier, 35 states have the law currently, whereas it's the defendant who has to prove that their conduct was lawful, and the government is automatically assumed to be right in that position. And so this is something that's been going on for a long time. Obama's DOJ definitely did reduce it to some extent, but they did also allow for equitable sharing to keep going. So even though equitable sharing is when some of the states pass laws that prevent civil forfeiture, but the federal government can now come in and the states can piggyback off of that. And of course, it's supported by police unions and such, but this is definitely theft. It's one of the reasons I'm in law school now, is protect against the government encroachment on the rights of citizens, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court decision.
Absolutely. I would just have to say that, you know, this is one of those instances.
Avis?
Yeah, this is definitely one of those instances where we can see that at least libertarians are consistent in their beliefs about the reality that the government should not be encroaching on individual rights, where we see conservatives are very inconsistent in that way. And in one way, they say that they want, quote unquote, states' rights, but in another way, they want to be able to tell me what I should and should not be able to do with my uterus. So either the government has the ability to encroach on people's rights, or they don't. And this is one instance where if you are consistent in your belief that individuals should have their rights not encroached on by the government, then obviously what the Supreme Court did right in this particular position was absolutely correct.
A peaceful protest turned deadly. 37-year-old black man was shot and killed by Baton Rouge police. His hands are in the air, and you still get shot by the cops.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
We're not going to let hate define us.
Race is a big part of this.
If truly all lives matter, then all lives need to matter equally.
What we require is action. What we require is accountability. We understand that black lives do matter, and we will keep focused on this issue.
NewsOne Now, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.